as Adventists, we've been here a long time. And we've been proclaiming the return of Christ for a long time. And I once preached a sermon one time, and I just said, I don't know when Jesus is going to come back. And I said, I really don't care. All that matters to me is that he does. Because think about it. For every human being who has ever lived, for every believer in Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, in their own experience, is never more than what? The length of your life, boom, you close your eyes, and the next thing you know is the return of Jesus. I'm getting old, so I'm going by how fast life goes by. And I have a feeling when people are resurrected, the first thing they're going to think is, wow, Lord, your coming really was quick after all. Because of how fast life goes. Anyway, unfortunately, though, as the years go by, this has caused some, even among us, to start doubting our prophetic message, including about America in prophecy and the mark of the beast and so forth, as we have taught it. There was an online article about a year and so ago called An Even Greater Controversy. And the argument was that the SDA interpretation of the second beast in Revelation 13, the lamb-like beast, arose in a social, political, and religious context radically different from what we have today, and therefore our interpretation needs to be reconsidered. In fact, that and the whole Sabbath Sunday scenario, the article argued, needed to be reevaluated in light of current events. How valid is this argument? That is, should we be opening to changing our understanding about last day events? Not details, because frankly, we haven't been given details. The Bible paints very broad strokes. Spirit of prophecy paints very broad strokes. But not changing the details, but the grand overarching scenario itself. The article argued, in light of current events, needed to be reevaluated. And I want to look at some of those arguments as the religious liberty sermon for this morning. Now, his first point was that the world of early Adventism, say the 1840s to the 1880s, was radically different from our world today. Okay, well, duh. Our world is different today than from 40 years ago, than that of 100 years ago. The Bible itself was written in a world inconceivably different from ours as well. What then is his point? His point that our pioneers, like the Bible writers, were influenced by their time and culture. Well, that's a no-brainer. Of course they were. Moses was influenced by his time and culture. David was influenced by his time and culture. Paul was by his time and culture. But so what? Are there not certain transcendent truths that, however much filtered as they inevitably are through the vagaries and contingencies of the human mind, impacted by culture and time, don't these truths that remain true anyway? That Paul wrote about Jesus dying on the cross, and wrote it in a time and a place and a culture radically different then ours does not for 1 second take away from the truth, the transcendent truths that Paul wrote about Jesus dying on the cross. Okay? So if the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13 is really America, and God has known through all time that it's America, who cares about whatever prejudices or limits or weaknesses impacted how our pioneers understood this truth? Of course, then there's the immediate issue. Well, were the pioneers right in how they understood it? And the article challenged that. For example, and here, whatever, you'll see my point. The author attacked the Adventist pioneers' depiction of America coming up out of the earth in contrast to waters symbolic of the multitudes of people. In other words, the idea of it arising not amid masses meant that our pioneers, the author claims, deliberately ignored the millions of native communities that were violently displaced. Now, please, look, Ellen White wrote this: the second beast could not then arise among the crowded and struggling nationalities of the old world. Okay? In contrast to these old world powers, the American continent was relatively uninhabited. If there were 100 Native Americans here, would that have counted as populated? Would 1,000 have counted as inhabited? 100,000? You know, his argument, no matter how woke, misses the point. This vast continent, this new world, was very, very different from the, quote, the crowded and struggling nationalities of the old world. That's why the Bible, instead of depicting it arising out of water, which over and over is symbolic of masses of people, floods, armies, instead of depicting it like that, it depicted it as coming out of the earth. So the pioneers had a very accurate interpretation of the symbols given the contrast between America, the New World, and Europe, the Old World. Next, the author stressed how the idea of manifest destiny could have impacted the pioneers' interpretation of the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13. Now, what is you might have heard it in school, or manifest destiny. This was kind of this fuzzy and inchoate idea of Americans as the chosen nation. I think Abe Lincoln called the Americans an almost chosen people. And it was the idea that America was brought forth by God not only to conquer this vast continent, but to spread its values around the world. Okay, this was the idea of manifest destiny. And it could be used, as it was, unfortunately, to justify some very not nice things that our country has done. After all, we're the chosen nation. We're chosen by God. We could do whatever we want. Okay? The author wrote this: as they, and he's talking about the early Americans, as they expanded westward around 1840, they saw it as a divine obligation to stretch the boundaries of their noble republic from sea to sea. Okay, and this is the idea of America as the shining city on a hill, and the author implied that this influenced the Adventist interpretation of the lamb-like beast? Well, am I missing something here? Is there something, is there not one rather inconvenient truth? Is that for our early Adventists who did this interpretation, this shining city on a hill would one day be lobbing 120 millimeter shells on everything below it. Okay? This noble republic, quote, noble republic, they believe would speak like a dragon and, quote, cause as many as not worship the image of the beast to be killed. The early pioneers, one of the main reasons they signified America as the beast power was because of slavery. They weren't just enamored of this wonderful, great, shining city on a hill. The early Adventist view of America was, it seems, about as opposite the concept of manifest destiny as possible. They depicted the United States not as the savior of the world, but as one of the two great powers in the very last days that would bring end-time persecution. So that argument is as vacuous as the other one. Now, the author makes a point here. Let's look at this. Regarding the United States and Sunday laws, which were much more prevalent in the 1800s than they are today. In fact, there were Adventists who were jailed over the issue. That's something that probably hasn't happened in this country, jail, much less fined or anything, in 100 years. He argued, therefore, that America fulfilling its prophetic role was, in the 1880s, much more likely than it would be today, where Sunday laws, at least for now, have gone the way of rotary phones. Okay? Fair enough. At present, there's nobody really talking about Sunday laws anymore except Adventists. And you got some who are talking about how, I've been the victim of this, how they're getting ready to pass Sunday laws in Congress any day now, and we Jesuits at the GC, we're covering it all up from you. It was kind of ironic when I edited Liberty. Every year we had to have a Liberty campaign. And that's what this is. This is for the Liberty campaign. And we needed a religious liberty issue to get our people interested. And we used to think, if only somebody somewhere, if some county clerk in Spuds, Florida, was pushing for a Sunday law, we could maybe use that for our religious liberty campaign. But the fact of the matter is, we were not going to make anything up. We weren't going to do that. And yet, meanwhile, we're being accused of Congress at any moment is getting ready. Who was that guy? That book? Marcuson. Yeah, for years. We're hiding it from all of you. Well, that was 25 years ago. And where is the Sunday law? There's not now, at present. But as we know, everything could change. And very quickly. Anyway, he wrote this: because we have been taking conditions in the late 1800s and applying them to our day, where conditions for Sunday laws are questionable, he wrote that perhaps we should now be exploring the equivalent of a Sunday law in our age. Okay, the equivalent of a Sunday law in our age. How do we even deal with it? But first, let's deal with his claim about mid-19th century America more likely fulfilling its prophetic role than early 21st century America. First, it's very hard to see how America, when first identified by Adventists as the second beast, and this was in 1851, it was very hard to see how it could have caused all the world to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. You know, in 1876, 25 years after that identification, what was it, Sitting Bull, what he slaughtered General George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry Regiment at the Battle of, I think it was at Little Bighorn. Was that where he did it? They butchered the Americans there. And this was the behemoth that was going to enforce the mark of the beast on the world. What was America? In the 1880s, America's Navy consisted of about 48 decrepit ships. And these were going to, with these, we were going to enforce the mark of the beast on the whole world. Today, oh, bless you. How did you know that? How did you know that? Well, I got to try to preach and gargle and swallow at the same time. Look, after the collapse, well, actually, really, even after World War II, the United States became the world hegemon. And then with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the Cold War, no power in the world comes anywhere near the U.S. in military might. In 2020, we spent so much money on defense that you take the next 7 powers together. See, I got here the next 7 largest spenders: China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil. We spent what they spent combined. And we do that, the world has never seen anything like the U.S. military and the might we have. I've been to places where the Americans have bombed, with America, and woof, it's you do not want to be on the other side of that. Okay. Now, whatever the present obstacles to prophecy being fulfilled, and they're there, a prophecy seemed much more likely today to be fulfilled than it did in 1851 or 1880 or 1920. In fact, I remember the fall of 1979. I had just gotten born again. I didn't even know I was a sinner. I was converted. I just met God, and overnight I was a believer, and I met these people in a health food store. And I didn't know they were Adventists. It would have meant nothing to me if they said they were. And for some reason, I said, is America in the Bible? I want to study American prophecy. Imagine that, not knowing a thing, for some reason asking these people. And they said, yeah, we could show you something. And I'll never forget my first, I got converted totally on an experience. And then a couple days later, they take me through Daniel 2. Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome. We get down to the feet and toes, and in Europe they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men and not cleave one to another. I found out something that maybe I'm the only person in the world. I just got done listening to Prince Harry's book. Am I the only person in the world that has some sympathy for this kid? That's what I think like. But I didn't realize, do you realize that the Windsors, until 1917, they were the house of Saxe, Coburg, Gotha. Now, if that sounds more like Wiener Schnitzel and Schnapps than Mary Poppins, it's true, it's German. Those people are Germans. Well, and they were in the middle of World War I. The Germans had a bomber called the Gotha, And the House of Saxby-Coburg-Gotha thought, it might not be such a good idea to keep that name. So they changed it to Windsor. But talk about a fulfillment of prophecy. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. They're all Germans, but not cleave one to another. Exactly as the prophecy. Well, anyway, they told me that prophecy, and wow. It gave me logical, rational evidence, and to this day, Daniel 2 stands for me as logical, rational evidence, and I defy anybody anywhere who could explain to me how Daniel 2 could have been written if there wasn't a sovereign God who knows and controls the future. But anyway, the point is, this is 1979. We're still licking our wounds from fleeing Vietnam with our tail between our legs. The Soviet Union was firmly controlled in Eastern Europe. The Sandinistas were taken over in Latin America. And I remember in 1979 thinking, how could America ever fulfill its prophetic role because of the Soviet Union? And I remember thinking, what? Was the Soviet Union just going to disappear or something? Which is exactly what happened. So anyway, radical changes can happen very quickly. For those old enough, you never would have dreamed what we had seen happen with the Soviet Union. Okay, so that argument about America fulfilling it, but what about the equivalent of a national Sunday law? Let's look at the text. Revelation depicts final events as centering around worship. Worship either of the beast and its image, Revelation 14:9, or worship of God, the Creator, the one who, quote, made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. Revelation 14:7, language taken directly from the fourth commandment, quote, the seventh day Sabbath. So there's this conflict here, this contrast. You worship the beast in its image, or you worship the Creator, one or the other. And that language was right from the seventh day Sabbath. And this is the one commandment that shows why we should worship God, because He is the Creator. And it's the same commandment that Rome sought to change. I mean, replacing God's decree, the seventh day, with man's decree, the first. Look, we all know the quotes, and I can still remember those first few. The Adventists studied, and they showed me the quotes about changing the Sabbath to Sunday. And when I first got converted, I was a firebrand. I was out telling everybody about all this stuff, whether they wanted to hear it or not. I used to write graffiti on bathroom walls, Sunday worship, mark of the beast. And one time in graduate school, somebody wrote over it, "No way, Cliff." I freaked out. I thought I was being anonymous. And, but I mean, we observed Sunday instead of Saturday because the Roman Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday from the convert's catechism. I mean, I remember in the beginning, I used to go around quoting these things to these other believers in other churches, and they never heard them before, and I don't think they appreciated it either. But it's true. I mean, how do you deny it? Meanwhile, so you got Sabbath, you got the other. And then meanwhile, the Lord's followers are depicted twice in Revelation as keeping the commandments of God. And I'm sorry, the commandments of God include the fourth commandment, the one commandment that shows why we should specifically worship God as our Creator. Think about this. No more foundational symbol of Him as our Creator exists than the seventh-day Sabbath. I mean, it goes right back to Eden. It goes right, think about this symbol. You're right at the very bottom. You're at the foundation, the creation week itself, the last day. It's just the utter foundation. So to come in for an earthly power to try to change, in a sense, to usurp this most basic sign of the most basic doctrine, creation, is an attempt to usurp the Lord's authority at the most basic level possible, that of God as the Creator. The only level more deeper is God Himself, okay? And they can't get to Him. They can't usurp Him. So they attempt to usurp the most foundational, basic symbol of Him, as close as you can. The foundational sign of Him as the Creator, and that is the seventh-day Sabbath. But you say, okay, fine. Come on. Persecution, death over the Sabbath? Well, suppose I told you we got some great examples of this in the Bible. We've got great examples of this principle of man's law, man's tradition versus God's, dealing with the fourth commandment, and we have it in the life of Jesus Himself. John 5, 1 through 16, after another miraculous healing on the seventh day, the leaders quote John 5:16. The leaders persecuted Jesus and sought to kill Him because He had done this on the Sabbath. What? Death? Death over the seventh-day Sabbath? How about Matthew 12? After Jesus healed a man the man with the withered hand, Matthew 12, 9 through 13. How did the religious leaders respond? But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Death over the seventh-day Sabbath. Now, the specific issue here with Jesus isn't the same as we understand it'll be in final events, but it's close enough. Human traditions versus the law of God. And in both cases, the law of God centered and will center around the biblical Sabbath. So really, again, whatever issues, however, admittedly, it's hard to see how everything could play out. But for me now, I can honestly say it's hard to see how the issue in the last days of either worshiping the Creator or worshiping the beast in its image won't be over the one commandment that points to God as the Creator and that reveals why we should worship Him. The one commandment that the beast's power usurped. In other words, I don't see how, if the issues are worship God, Creator, how the final struggle in the last days outwardly can be over anything other than the issue of Sabbath versus Sunday. So the need, and the author, by the way, in this article, he said the need to find an equivalent for a Sunday law, he never gave any alternatives. And I wonder why. It's because there isn't one. What possibly could symbolize the issue greater than Sabbath Sunday in terms of what it means regarding whether you worship God, the Creator, or you worship the beast and its image. Now, here too, this was, I think, some of the most revealing lines in this essay was that, he's talking about we need to look at these things differently. And he wrote that whenever there is a spirit of coercion or the expectation that we can win God's favor in exchange for anything we might do, the spirit of the papacy reigns. So in other words, we got to move in another direction. We can't look at that. But I mean, this might sound profound, but I'm not sure what it's supposed to mean in last day events. The spirit of coercion? What is that, a joke? Like everything from Putin's Russia to the Teamsters Union, from North Korea to Saudi Arabia? Anything to win God's favor by our works, from Lubavitcher Hasidim to legalistic Adventism. See, his revisionist alternatives to America in Rome, it becomes so broad, they become so broad and so wide as to be meaningless. Anything with the spirit of coercion, when in history has there never been a spirit of coercion? Now, what do I think is going on here? Well, a while back, a couple years ago, some guy posted a video, an Adventist, about when the Pope addressed Congress a couple years ago. And he made some grand prophetic announcements about what this meant and so on. And I think he probably predicted some dates that I guarantee you have come and gone. I mean, I was so repulsed by the video after 5 minutes, I couldn't watch it. I mean, it was just nonsense. I mean, and what bothered me is not so much that we have these kind of charlatans, but that there were enough Adventists that took them seriously that the GC had to get one of the people there to make a video to refute this kind of stuff. Now, I call this headline eschatology. And it's to take every little thing in news and make it a harbinger of the end. This is it, okay? This kind of thing. And it's generally a problem of the conservative Adventists. Those of us like myself who believe our message. But this article in this online magazine made me realize that the left is just as guilty of headline eschatology. Those of like me, and I've done this and I've gotten burned. I've been publishing in the church since 1984, okay? And I don't make many more predictions about what's going to happen outside the broad stuff, because it's very easy to get caught up in it, but because I believe it. But the left does the same thing, but they look at stuff like this article at what they think denies our prophetic message. Okay, they look for headlines that deny it. And neither works, because as I said, the Bible paints last day events in very broad strokes. Okay, very broad. The spirit of prophecy, though filling in some detail, paints in broad strokes as well. Not, more detail, but still, she paints with a fairly wide brush about what's going on. And once you get between those brush strokes, between the lines, into headline stuff, you are speculating. And that has not worked out. I mean, I've been in the church 40 some years now. Every single one of these things that these people have done and their dates and their predictions, every last one of them has turned out wrong. Because they're going where we have not been given the light to go. You know, look, I need faith to believe that Jesus is going to raise the dead. I need faith to believe in the second coming. But folks, I don't need a modicum of faith to believe in the role of Rome in last day events. In Daniel 2, you've got Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece. You've got one power that rises up after ancient Greece, and it exists to the end of the world, changes form, and then it exists till the end of the world where it's supernaturally destroyed at the end of time. So pray tell, what power comes up after ancient Greece and goes on? Daniel 7. Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece. One power comes up after ancient Greece, a persecuting power, a power that will think to change times and laws, a blasphemous power, a power that exists all the way till it's destroyed at the end of time. In Daniel 8, Media Persia is named for you. Greece is named for you. And then one more power arises greater than either Media Persia, greater than Greece, and that it exists 2 times. Daniel 8 said this prophecy is for the end, time of the end. And in Daniel 2, the end is the second coming of Jesus. In Daniel 7, the end is the second coming of Jesus. So the time of the end. In Daniel 8, Media, Persia, Greece, one power arises and exists to where it's supernaturally destroyed at the end of time. Okay, and that power appears again in Revelation 13, along with the second beast, which we believe is Protestant America. And their appearance all unfold in the context of persecution in the last days before Jesus comes back. And now what's fascinating too, though the author lightly touched on it, this is one of the most stunningly fascinating fulfillments of prophecy that I've seen, even in the 40-some years I've been in the church. And it's the American attitude towards Rome has totally and completely, exactly as we have been saying since Ellen White wrote Great Controversy, that it's over. I've heard people say the Reformation is over. When is the last time you've ever heard any Protestants anywhere talking about Rome as the Antichrist? Rome, it's over and it's done. Where is the hostility that Protestants had, and rightly so, against the institution, against the whole institution of Rome? It's not talked about anymore because it's over and done. It's so common now that we forgot. No one even thinks about how astounding this change is, exactly as we predicted, and is also what would help America fulfill its end-time role. I was told that this guy, Alf Landon, I think in the 1920s, ran for the presidency. He was a Roman Catholic. It was an outrage. Some of you might be, I was born then, but I don't remember when John F. Kennedy ran for president. There was quite a lot of stir among Protestant leaders. A Roman Catholic president. Kennedy had to go down to Texas and give a talk to all these Protestant evangelical leaders to assuage them that he wasn't a pawn of Rome and so on and so forth. Does anybody even know or care that Joe Biden is a Catholic? No, it's not an issue anymore. It's not, and that is in many ways a stunning fulfillment of prophecy. Sure, I admit, it's still hard to see how our prophetic scenario could play out. Now, I admit it. I don't have a problem. I can't see it right now. But it was hard to see how it could have played out in the mid-1800s, or the late 1800s, or the early 1900s, or the mid-20th century. It's never been easy, but so what? It wasn't easy to see the Messiah nailed to the cross. Nobody expected that. Nobody could see it, however much it was depicted in prophecy. And yet it's easier to see America fulfilling its prophetic role today than it was at the time of early Adventists or even at the writing of the Great Controversy. Let's just look at the situation. We are the world's greatest superpower. There's never been anything, the wealth in this country, the wealth and the military might of this country. It's unbelievable. The world has never seen anything like it. So we remain the world's only superpower. And man, talk about democracy being fragile. I'm 67 years old. I remember the Vietnam War. I remember the fighting and the protests. But I've never seen the kind of discord. You know, Harper's Atlantic Monthly a couple of years ago had a cover article, How to Avert a Civil War. And it wasn't like people are not talking if there's going to be a civil war, but when and how. I mean, it's amazing how democracy is fragile. I mean, I even read a book where they said the intelligence agencies in other countries were presenting reports, like what ours does, to their governments on what to expect in a post-democratic America. Because it's just hard to see. I was amazed at how the midterms, how calm things were. But what we have seen in the past couple of years, who could have imagined this? And again, something is going to have to change in this country for America to fulfill its prophetic role. But in all the years I've been in the church, I've never seen anything like the past couple years. And Protestant America knows almost nothing about its historical and justified antipathy to Rome. It's done. It's a done deal. And together, Catholics and Protestants, whatever, they are firmly wedded to their Sunday. We all know that. You've met people. You talk either Catholics or Protestants. They're firmly wedded to it. And it's not an issue for them, but on that, they are united. And the other thing, too, it discouraged me when I saw it. I don't know what I'm thinking. You ever hear of Lee Strobel? He wrote this great book, The Case for Christ. Well, Strobel came out with the book. I got it and read it. Came out with a book called The Case for Heaven. And I remember thinking, I've been an Adventist 40 years, and all are preaching on the state of the dead, such a clear, distinct, important doctrine. And the vast majority of Protestants are clueless on it. They believe when you die, if you're saved, you go right to heaven. If the evil, you go right to hell. We've made almost no impact with that. And talk about being wide open to spiritualism, near-death experiences. These people die, clinically dead, And they talk about floating through a tunnel and meeting their dead relatives. I mean, there's scientific journals that study it. People aren't going to be in a seance so much anymore. But now it's science behind it. I wrote an article one time. You could Google something called the Soul Phone Foundation. I couldn't believe it. These people are using science. They say they could use quantum physics to talk to the dead. And they say they get text messages from the dead, and they're claiming that they want it as the technology advances, videos. And the creepy thing, and if you've no great controversy, they'll say they ask the dead questions that only the dead relatives would know. And they say things that they know only their dead relatives would know. Well, this is exactly what we have been told. So look at how everything is set up. Okay? And Catholics and Protestants, what do we say? What are we told? The threefold union: Protestantism, apostate Protestantism, Catholicism, and spiritualism. We see it now in our context. So we need to look at that, but the principles are there. And for those of us, those who are into headline theology, that perhaps are trapped by the narrow thinking expressed in this article, I have one word, because it's still hard to see. I have one word for us: COVID. Look at how quickly. Now, I know people could cut each other's throats over, the vaccine or not. I don't want to get into that. But look at how radically and quickly, overnight, the world changed. I mean, it was stunning how, the world changed. So that shows us that really overnight. And I read something just the other day. I said to my wife this morning, you had World War I, and then right after World War I, you had the Spanish influenza, the beginning of the 20th century. And what came about 10 years later? The Great Depression. And with fragile and as things are, and as crazy, the country's gone nuts. This country, we see stuff that you couldn't have believed 10, 15 years ago. But, we're still kind of fat, rich, and happy. But let the economy collapse. Let the economy collapse, and boom, everything can change. And if COVID doesn't show how rapidly the world could change, ultimately, what does? I don't know when final events are going to unfold. I don't know how long we're going to be here for. I met Adventists. I went out with an Adventist girl like 40 years ago, and she told me when her parents were dating, they were told, well, it's one thing if you want to get married, but don't even think of having children. Time's too short. Well, they've been long dead and gone, okay? And their grandkids are getting old. Their grandkids are probably my age. So I don't know when it's going to unfold. And as I said, it's, and ultimately in the end, the second coming of Jesus for every one of us is, death could come in a moment. And it's easy. Really, think about it, the second coming, or if you're going to have the third coming, that's the next thing you're going to know. All I know is we need to be ready each day. And the only way to be ready each day is to be each day surrendered to the Lord Jesus. leaning on His righteousness, knowing that your only hope of salvation is what Jesus has done for you, outside of you, in place of you, a righteousness woven in the loom of heaven. And when you understand that, you love God. And what is good? For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. And as far as I could tell, that means all the commandments, including the commandments that shows God as the Creator, and we worship Him because He's the Creator, as opposed to worshiping the beast and his image.